Okay, so I'm urging everyone back in, and I'm sort of going to roughly sketch out the lay of the land for what's to come. So there are going to be 2 panels now, and after that, we are going to ask you to stay in this room. The reason being is we are going to present the awards. But because I do not yet, and underscore, do not yet, have my, however we do this, somewhat acceptable airline, so yes, I'm looking for an airline, we could not get David Block here out of Israel. So we will do the awards in here, and then we will go in the other room, and there'll be food, drink, etc. And there'll also be an opportunity to look again at the work of Uta and also some of Emifa's in here. And this book, which we announced last night, which some of you got earlier today, will also be available in the other room. So that's the lay of the land. And then you get to sleep in your clothes and come back again in the morning. Because we love you. Actually, we do. So, the next part of the program is the following. It is a, what are we officially calling this? It is a public consultation on the responsible jewelry supply chain lexicon, which is also being referenced as the Blue List. And I will just tell you that over several years, about 12 to 16 people have met regularly from wherever they were in the world, I was among them, to work on this project. And the panelists today, because they will all discuss aspects of this, are Feriel Zerouki, who had some wonderful comments earlier, but I will officially say that she is the Chief Trade and Industry Officer of De Beers Group. She's also the President of the World Diamond Council, and she is also the co-chair with Gaetano Cavaliere, who spoke this morning, of this nomenclature committee. Then, also, Sarah Yood, who is CEO and General Counsel of JBC and head of the Ethics Commission, as Gaetano said, and was on this committee. Steve Benson, who is CIBJO's Director of Communications and also participated in these meetings. And as Miss Piggy would have said, moi. So, I don't know where my phone is, but let the games begin. And Steve is our fearless leader through this conversation. And we want to know what you think.
Thank you very much. There is a panel over here, but we'd like this to work a little bit differently, because the idea is that it is a public consultation, so you, the public, and we want to hear from you. I'll explain afterwards what you need to do actually to become officially part of the consultation itself. I'd also like to shout out to Ronnie Leb van der Linden, who's sitting over there, because we were all on the panel, and Ronnie's on the panel as well. So he's there, so he might want to say something as well, but but he deserves the same credits as everybody else sitting on the stage. Can we have the thing up on the screen over here? All right. So the way this is going to work over here is I'll explain briefly what the Blue List is. And then everybody, all the panelists over here will get a chance to relate to part of the blue list. And then we're going to open up to you, and we would like to get your response. And Lisa, who's been doing this from the front, will know when we run out of time and will tell us to end the conversation. Okay. Briefly. Correct. Everybody coming to the event over here was sent a letter before. In the letter, there was a link to the document itself. I don't know how many of you people sort of downloaded the document and read through it, so I appreciate that some of what we're going through over here is not going to be unfamiliar to you. But we're going to work on the assumption over here that you all need the definitions, and in any case, I think you'll get a clearer explanation of some of the key definitions. Not every single definition that we're going to discuss today we won't get to every single one. We've picked out a number which we think are key, but you are free to relate to whatever you want to, and if you think there are definitions that we should have related to which we didn't, we'd be happy to hear about those as well. Just briefly, what's CIBJO's role in it? CIBJO deals with industry standards. We bring out a range of standards for different product categories that I presume some of you know about. A full product standard within CIBJO jargon is we produce what is called Blue Book. So we'll have a Blue Book for diamonds, we have for colored gemstones, for pearls, precious coral, and so on and so forth. But this is not a Blue Book standard. This over here, we're dealing over here, the document that we're producing over here is a guidance document. It's a set of recommended terms, all of which deal with words that are used to describe either products or practices in the jewelry chain of distribution, the responsible jewelry chain of distribution. So there is the use of these terms is voluntary. I think we've gone through this. The one all the titles are here. The one thing I think I'd point out over here, because it's come up several times today, Feriel is also the mover and the shaker behind Gem Fair, which has been spoken about a few times over here. Should have been on the page, I think. Sorry, I've got it over here as well. Essentially, we organize the blue list in the following way. There essentially are four main categories: business claims, sourcing terms, product claims, and then tracing terms. And then there's a whole section on terms that shouldn't be used. It was, in many respects, those terms that shouldn't be used that was the original impetus to do this job. The job itself, we started working about 2018. At any single point in time, there were about 12 to 16 people on the committee. I suspect over a period of time, there were quite a lot more than that. In fact, I remember in the beginning, in the first 2 years, we actually used to run 2 sessions for meetings so we could catch people living throughout the United States of America all the way through to the West Coast, and then we'd have another meeting for people all the way through to Asia. We've deliberately tried to make this as inclusive as possible, to have people from all various product categories and all different sections of the chain of distribution, large companies and brands as well as SMEs. It's not perfect. We've done the best that we can. So, like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to different people among the panelists over here to relate to some of the terms, and these are the ones we have selected to present to you. The first one relates to business products and sourcing claims, and what we're calling the hierarchy. And for that, I'm going to turn to Feriel, who was together with Gaetano Cavalieri, was the co-chair of the nomenclature committee that has done the work being presented. Feriel, would you like to take off?
Thanks, Steve, and thanks everyone for this opportunity. I touched on the reason behind this earlier. You know, I've sat in so many panels, and I've been a member of the audience where people talk about responsibility and ethics and sustainability. with no understanding of what each other means. And sometimes also use product as a shortcut to these claims. So I use this material, therefore I am ethical. And that is a shortcut because from a PR perspective, again, a marketing perspective, it just sounds good, right? And so I actually, in 2018, with my team, did a sort of screen grab of all these marketing claims being used in the jewelry industry. And so the words that are in the blue list lexicon are not ones that we chose. They're ones that are being used by the trade. And so we started doing research to see if they were defined. And actually, they're not. And so there's a bunch of good actors out there who just don't know that they're doing something that could be misleading. And so it was very important for us to bring different diverse views around the table to say, okay, as an industry, what do we mean when we say these words, when we speak to each other? And so the words that are being used, as Steve mentioned, were all focused on either responsible sourcing claims or traceability claims or. And so for the majority of the words, some words were added by the committee because of the very intellectual conversations that taught us much in these discussions. But for the majority, I would say 90% were not chosen by the committee. They were chosen because they are being used to speak with consumers. And all of us in the jewelry trade need to protect consumer confidence in the jewelry industry. So misleading the consumer is something that we should all pull together and work against. So, bringing me back to this, the way that we thought about it was, what are the existing frameworks? So you've got your ESG frameworks. Again, you know, it's the Sustainable Development Goals were launched, then nobody knew really how to measure them. And then there's all these different types of ESG metrics, and which one do you pick? It gets so confusing. And are they accessible to all the players? And with all the research we did, we looked at dictionaries, American and British. We looked at legal documents, and we looked at existing standards, and pulled this simple way of thinking about it. So your responsible sourcing is about meeting international standards. It's your baseline. Are you complying with the law? Do you know who you're dealing with, etc.? And that the majority of us in this industry should be able to claim, right? You don't need massive sustainability teams. You should be able to, as a business owner, know who you're dealing with, make sure that you're complying with the legal requirements. And everyone wakes up trying to do good and not trying to do harm, unless they're gonna do harm because they're a bad actor, right? So responsible means meeting that baseline criteria. Now you move up to ethical. So you're handling the responsible, you go up to ethical. When we looked up ethical, it was about morality. So it became a very difficult conversation with all the different cultures and religion in the room. And the products, right? The products, because, you know, colored stone guys are very strong. They love the product and they love their supply chain, and they're dealing with artisanal. Large players like us will deal mainly with large players, you know? And so the rules are slightly different, but the ethics are not. And so we said, okay, within the ESG framework, let's focus now, because the first is G, let's focus on the S, the social. What could you do from a social perspective? Where do you go over and above the law that's, that you are applying to, your local law? So for example, in very simple terms, a business could provide parental leave that is more than the statutory requirement for their employees, and you're doing something that is socially good. You can focus on labor practices and go over and above what is required to treat your people in a specific way that reflects the values of your business. And that's what ethical sourcing means. That's what we're proposing ethical sourcing to mean. And then sustainable. So sustainability, how many panels have you been in where people say, what does sustainability mean to you? And then everyone has like a slightly different view. And then there's the one definition, and I'm going to read it out because I always get the name wrong. The Brundtland report has the most recognized definition, which says that sustainability means development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. So as a committee, we said, okay, so that's got a very environmental impact. You know, how do you protect the planet of today for future generations? And that's where you focus on your E, your environmental protection. So if you as a business, and this applies to small players as well as large players, in fact, large players have more work to do when it comes to the environmental impact being minimized. What are you doing in terms of minimizing the environmental impact of your operation? So we've simplified it in that way, and we said that it's a journey of continuous improvement. You don't need to just be here or there or up there, but it makes sense that in this triangle, more players are starting here as they walk up the chain and can claim ethics or can claim sustainably sourced. So I'll leave you with that to think about, and then I will hand over to Steve.
We're gonna stay with you.
Right.
To run through this one. Please, you can comment on anything that we show. When you want to comment, if you want to come back to slides that we're showing, I'll pull the slide up again. But so that we can get through the definitions quickly and then turn it over to you, we'll just carry on.
Yeah.
So
I think the next one I picked is actually relevant to the previous conversation, which is, okay, these are, no, it's not the one that I was saying. I thought I was going to do traceability once, but I'm happy to do this one as well. So, origin. We noticed that a lot of marketing was happening around origin and provenance and source, and the words weren't clear. Again, they were being used interchangeably. And so origin was pretty clear. It needed to be focused on the region, the country or group of countries when you're focusing on origin. And it's the where. So the source is, we looked at the verb because noun could also mean origin, but we really focused on how do you differentiate origin from source, and we focused on sourcing the verb. And actually in our industry, we have industrial, we have artisanal, we have product that is made in a lab, and that information needs to be provided in a clear, disclosed manner to consumers. And therefore, source, we said it's about the how. How is this product coming to consumer? And then provenance is the who. So it's about the business and what the values they stand for. What standards do you apply? If not standards, what thing do you support? And provenance basically brings everything together so that it helps you tell the story of the where, the how, and the who.
This is the one that you...
Traceability. So there was a very interesting conversation about traceability in the previous panel. So with traceability, the discussion focused around what needs to be true for a product to be claimed to be traceable. And so you, as a business, needs to know your supply chain. We call that the chain of accountability, the who. You don't need to disclose who, right? That's commercially sensitive information. But you as a business need to know who you're dealing with. So if you know your chain of accountability, that doesn't mean that your product is traceable. It means that you know your chain of accountability. Then you've got chain of custody. So you've heard this term being used a lot. And again, they say that the product is traceable because they've got chain of custody. But no, the chain of custody is about the movement of the product and documenting that. And real traceability only happens when you've got both, where you know where your product comes from and you know the players in your supply chain. Then you can claim traceability. So these are the three that I believe I'm presenting today. Do I have more?
No, we're going to move on to you. I'll just make a point over here because there were questions about blockchain. Blockchain essentially is just going to deal with the chain of custody. It's going to give you a record of exactly who holds onto the material at any point in time.
Yes, but for the definitions, we haven't said, we've said very simply, like, what is it? It focuses on the product moving, right? I think that with blockchain technology, I'm a supporter of it for certain sizes and up for storytelling. It's no secret that De Beers was the first to work on blockchain technology with nothing to do on regulation, or we just knew that consumers were going to be asking, where do these diamonds come from, and and do the values of these products reflect my own values? That's based on data and research that we did from a consumer marketing perspective. We knew it was coming. We didn't know when, so we needed to be ready. And the one thing in the diamond industry is aggregation is so important. And so we as a producer aggregate. We're probably the only producer that aggregates, but the entire supply chain aggregates to create the product, the value for retail. So we said, okay, we need to find a workable solution for this. But it's only for areas that where it makes sense. There is this pressure for everything to be traceable on blockchain, and we've said it's for gem quality, 4 grainers and up, and we've invested so much money because we've seen that it is part of marketing. We started again before sanctions, before regulation, because we saw value in it. And then we found a conduit for the artisanal mining sector through GemFair, but again, only for certain sizes and up. We know there's this beautiful story to tell when it comes to natural diamonds. And we thought, when those exceptional stones are sold at Sotheby's or Christie's and they come with a book and a story, and we thought, why can't we do that for more product? Why does it only need to be for those like one-of-a-kind pieces? And that's why we invested in it. Later on came regulation, and this is what traceability needs, and we kept saying we've always been doing it not for regulation but for the story of provenance, because we have a beautiful story to tell. So in this is guidance for the industry. We haven't said you have to use blockchain or you have to. We just said when you say it's traceable, you need to know the guys in your supply chain, and you need to know where your product comes from. Then you can claim it's traceable.
Okay, let us move on. And we'll turn over to Lisa, who will deal with these terms. These are all terms over here that deal with the product itself, and ways in which we describe the product rather than the way in which the product is handled. And we've chosen 3 terms over here, the one being recycled. And we're talking about recycled gemstones. There is a definition which was spoken to earlier today about recycled gold and precious metals, which if John wants to speak to, we can do as well. But and then the vintage jewelry and antique jewelry. Please.
Well, with regard to recycled stones, this was really kind of a grosso modo term because there was a lot of discussion about the various connotations that repurposed had, reused had, recycled had, and to be quite honest about it, there wasn't really a perfect solution for anybody. As Steve mentioned, the committee steered away from discussion of gold and other precious metals, and we can have a separate conversation about that. But with regard to stones, the idea is that, for example, the stone might have come from your grandmother's ring, and perhaps the stone is recut. Perhaps it is not recut, it is reused. Similarly, it could also apply to a stone that, for example, if you have a maison that buys a piece and, you know, for whatever reason decides to take the stone out, reuse the stone, you know, perhaps if you're dealing with the Koenigsberg, you're looking for something that's a bit more grand in locution, but the fact is that effectively it applies to all of those practices. And again, there was a fair amount of sensitivity discussed by various members of the committee, depending on where they came from, did they work for Cartier or what have you, as to nuances of language. And that's actually one of the things I think that was most interesting about working on the project and continuing to work on it, which is the nuance of language. Because in the next two terms that I'm addressing, vintage and antique, this is really mostly for the purpose of being able to demarcate something that it's not only about the age from an object or historical appreciation point of view, but it can also have to do with things like classification for taxation and customs and things like that. And so for those of you that are really into terminology and periods and all the rest of it, these terms will not be deeply satisfying. But what they do aim to do is to create a demarcation zone between something that falls into what could be considered antique, as the term goes, which is over 100 years. I mean, clearly there's an awful lot of time that's embraced by over 100 years. And then the term vintage, again, conceivably not as satisfying as it might be, because for people who are interested in you know, more than if you're looking beyond jewelry, there can be implications to the word vintage, but there was a clear wish to avoid association with specific adjectives or terms that could connote any specific style or period. So the term vintage was adopted. And one of the ways that these terms were arrived at is that consultation of people not on the committee by committee members. In other words, the process was taken beyond the group itself and really into what I guess you could call the trade in this instance, for identification in particular of the terms antique and vintage. But they are specifically stripped of any kind of stylistic referentiality.
Okay, we're going to come to our last two sets of terms over here, which I'll pass over to Sarah. One term over here that we've discovered might be controversial was the term grandfather.
That's why I picked it to talk about.
Right. So we leave it to Sarah to explain. But it took up a lot of conversation that we never expected it would when we struck out.
So I just want to put it out there that my actual dream panel invitation is to be invited to be on a panel called Things I Hate. And so I picked two things to talk about today that drive me crazy. And one of which is the term grandfathered, which I accept is used. However, the terminology itself has racist origins, and so I think we should, as an industry, try to work to eliminate using this word in the context. And so we did spend a lot of time talking about this at the committee level, because I spent a lot of time talking about this at the committee level. I do think that the word legacy for material is a valid alternative. However, I acknowledge that grandfathered is the term that is used the most often in the trade. And so one of the ways that we've sort of mitigated the use of that term is by saying in the guidance for how to use the term that it should only be used in business-to-business contexts. You shouldn't be using this terminology with consumers. It's going to turn off your consumer if they know about this. And if you want more information about like why this is a historically racist term, I'm happy to talk to you about that. But the definition itself is about material that existed in the supply chain prior to some legal requirement or a new restriction or something like that. And so we see that now with, with Russian diamonds, for example, that there were plenty of Russian diamonds that were sold in the trade prior to the invasion of Ukraine and the war, and those have not been made illegitimate by the restrictions on import. And so that's the type of material that we're talking about with this term, and I would encourage you to keep the use of the word grandfathered in the trade and to use legacy or exempted material or something else when you're talking to consumers about it. And we can, I think, go to the next one. As you see, I chose things I hate. So terms to avoid using. Almost all of the terms that are defined in the Blue List are, as Fariel said earlier, terms that don't have definitions, at least, from the US perspective. I would say the only one that does is recycled, and it does not work in the jewelry context. And so there are some terms that we recommend not using for a couple of different reasons. Eco-friendly and environmentally friendly, we know from the green guides from the Federal Trade Commission that those claims are incredibly difficult to substantiate, and the consumers don't know what you mean when you use them. Like, what does eco-friendly mean? That could have 12 million different definitions or contexts, and it's just too broad for it to be meaningful. Biodegradable, this term does not apply to most of our products, and it's actually one of the ones that is defined in the FTC Green Guides, and so, let's not use that. Again, green and greener, it's too broad, it's very vague, it's not specific, it communicates nothing, please stop using it. And then also energy efficient and energy smart. Again, those are a section of terms that are defined in the FTC Green Guides. It's really difficult to substantiate. So in general, and if you've ever heard me on a panel before, you've heard me say this, this is a method, this entire list is a method to be more specific about the claims that you're making. It's not the only method, but it is one, and that is the thing that I want the industry to keep moving towards, is being specific about claims in general. Claims, our advertising claims about jewelry, about the environment, need to be specific in order for a consumer to understand them and to place the right amount of value on them. And so that's why I wanted to talk about these.
Okay, so we'll open up the floor, and anybody who has a question, a comment, wants to bring up some other term. I think the microphone is walking around over here. I'm sorry, we'll get back to you in a sec. Yeah.
Uh-oh, they gave me the microphone again. Hi, I'm Holly McHugh. I'm from Missouri. Thank you so much for what you have done. I know it's an incredible amount of work. I want to ask specifically about the word ethical. Fariel, you mentioned the word morality when you talked about it. I know the FTC shies away from the word ethical. My general counsel hates the word ethical. And we are entirely unable to use it. And I just want to say that I'm curious what the discussion was, or how you came to the choice of continuing to use ethical. And also curious how you believe these stack on each other, because maybe something can have an environmental protection but not actually be done socially responsible. So how can these stack? So the stacking, why ethical? Yeah, I think that's it.
Holly, those are great questions, because we had the same debates in the committee on the word ethical and how can a product be ethical, and the question of culture and moralities and lenses, and the reason why it stayed on the list is because it is being used. It is not our choice. We never chose the words. We just saw that it was being used in a manner that totally was not defined. And where it was defined, it made certain people highly uncomfortable. And so I don't want to give examples because then it becomes quite obvious who I'm talking about, but I just feel that what we've tried to do is remove cultural bias, and we've tried to use this guidance to say, right, if you are meeting your governance, your G, and you're meeting international requirements, and you do something over and above the law, whether it be supporting a community, whether it be, so you talk about it, it's evidenced, right? You know what you're standing for, then use ethical. Again, it's just a guideline. And that's where we landed with. And then we said, okay, that's our view. Now we've had 6 years or whatever of debate. And you can't really invite the entire trade to a committee to debate these things. So we were like, okay, now that we've sort of thought things through and debated it, we want to open it up for consultation, because even with the representation that we had in the room, we might have missed a beat. So we're really looking for feedback to say, hey, have you thought of this specific issue? Or maybe you can make this better and stronger if you were to change this. This is where we landed on, focused on the S on the ESG, so G and F and E. And where we landed was, regardless, it's going to drive good behavior, right? Now, people that follow these guidelines and say, I'm ethical as per this definition, they will talk about the social initiatives that they stand for. And it will create an encouraging sort of butterfly effect as people start understanding these terms. That's our view anyways. In terms of the stacking, we did a research on businesses, the brands, again I won't name them, where they made some green claims, right? They weren't in the industry, but they were big brands, where they made green claims and even social claims, environmental claims and social claims, but weren't paying the women minimum wage. So they made these massive claims about how they only work with women and blah blah blah, and then these are the efforts that they do on environmental sustainability, and then an expose came out and they weren't paying these women. They got them as cheap labor. So it needs to be stacked. You can't claim the thing at the top if you're not doing the thing at the bottom. It is all interlinked.
Couldn't responsible be ethical and maybe the bottom line just be legal?
Yeah.
Well,
So yes. So exactly. Provide them in the comments, because when we discuss that, the local law. So what's okay in India, might not be okay for your consumer, right? So you need to be very transparent about it. Child labor. What's the age of a child?
It's legally to.
Okay, that's the answer, and that's the amazing debates that we had. Is it right or wrong? Is it right? Is it wrong to allow a 14-year-old in a developing country to earn a living? Or is it wrong? Right. You get where I'm going.
Sorry, I have the mic. So, Ferial, I really love what you're trying to achieve with this, and I see the dilemma that you all have had. But from a responsible business conduct advisory point of view, which is our bread and butter, this actually is prescriptive and violates conformance with the United Nations Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, which also relates to the environment, because it's not risk-based. What it's saying is that there's, by creating a pathway through which you must do social issues before you can do environmental to make a claim to be sustainable, you're essentially prescribing to the industry that they should prioritize addressing social risks before addressing environmental risk. But from a UNGP's implementation point of view, what you must do is work across your ESG risks to identify the most salient risks for your business based on your circumstances and your business relationships, and address those that are the highest priority on the basis of being salient, so that they are the most severe and the most likely to arise. And those may or may not be social, they may or may not be environmental. So I would love to see this talk about responsible. I completely agree with, and in my world, that means conformance with the OECD Responsible Business Conduct Guidance, which has 6 steps, which supports implementation of the OECD guidelines, a part of which is the UNGPs. And then I'd love to see, I agree with you, and the term ethical is entirely situated. Morality is universal, ethical is situated in culture. And therefore I completely agree that it's problematic. I see what you're trying to achieve. I would call it transformational, because responsible is a defensive posture to control risk. What you have here is an intentional investment to do some drive positive change in one particular area that may be chosen according to the USP values, exposure, priorities of that brand and its business. And I agree that should be celebrated and called out, but that I believe that should be allowed to be in whatever issue matters to the brand. And then sustainable, I like that it's about an integrated, more holistic approach that combines the E, the S, and the G. So there's a lot about this that makes sense to me, but there's a couple of things that are a concern. In the same vein, on the other slide on provenance and source, the definition you have for source is actually what the OECD Minerals Guidance defines as provenance. And I prefer what you have done here, but that is actually the guidance that is in law for gold under the Conflict Minerals Regulation in the EU and the Dodd-Frank Act. So what you might want to do is, if you want to maintain this, just make sure that you reference the conflict with that main guidance and show what it means, just to avoid that confusion.
Thanks, Estelle. Always great content. So this is, for the second point, please can you help us by submitting that so that we can have the team really look into it. On your first point, I don't believe so. So I'd like to challenge that, because I'm a strong believer of 2 things can be right at the same time. This is a guidance, yeah? It's not prescribing what you as a business must do. It is a guidance on definitions. So if the law says that you need to take a risk-based approach and you need to deal with the most salient issues and the impact that impacts your business, that's what you focus on. Then what do you call the thing? You look at the hierarchy. So if you're doing all 3, then claim sustainable sourcing. But as I said, you can't really claim sustainable sourcing without focusing on the E, the S, and the G, according to... Yeah, exactly. So my point is, this is not replacing the local law at all. This is a guidance on nomenclature. And again, I still don't see the point that you made earlier that this violates the law on what businesses need to do. I think I see it very differently. I see that a business needs to comply with what they need to comply with, but I see that the way that we communicate with consumers needs to be clarified, and the two things don't need to be working against each other.
I'm really glad I'm going after Estelle, because actually I have a point to piggyback off of this, and it sounds like you're looking for feedback, so
Yes.
feedback I'll provide. One, just on the buckets, like, do you need to have building blocks? Just throwing it out there. Do you need them? Do you actually need these different responsible, ethical, sustainable? Is it causing more confusion than is helpful? Just think about it. On the point that Estelle made, we're very much on the same wavelength. I was thinking about, if we can go back to that slide, actually, I think something to be careful, and I have a question then particularly for Sarah, who I know is the only lawyer on the panel. There may be others. You talked about international standards, and then you referenced national law. And this is a little bit of where my question comes into play, which is how does this framework interact with national, local law and regulation? So for example, the country that we're in right now and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, you technically, right, don't have to be abiding by that regulation anymore. Does that now, so if that's national law and national law is good enough, then, how do you kind of fit that within your framework? So I think there are going to be some places where depending on the culture or the moment or the zeitgeist, you're going to see a backing off of regulation and legislated acts. And then you have obviously everything happening in the EU otherwise, where there's a whole barrage of anti-greenwashing legislation. So my question, particularly for Sarah, is around kind of how you see this fitting into that framework. How do you create something that can be applied in different local, national markets, but at the same time is like kind of a harmonized and cohesive voice for everyone? Because I'm assuming that most of the people using this will be selling into different markets in different countries.
Yeah, so I'll say that at the top of almost every single CIBJO publication is a reference to national law, and it just says, if there's a conflict between this and your national law, you should do your national law. And so I think because it's an international organization, it recognizes that it cannot possibly write anything that will apply 100% of the time to every single country. That being said, so part of why I'm interested in this existing and the work that goes behind it is because of the current revision of the FTC Green Guides, which started in December of 2022 was when they asked for comment, and everybody submitted comments in April of 2023, and they held a workshop on the term recycling in May of 2023, and then we have heard nothing from the Federal Trade Commission since then. And quite honestly, one of the two lawyers who was on the project has left the Federal Trade Commission in the last month. And so the reality is, I don't think that we're getting anything from the US government on any of this anytime soon. And even if we do get something, the priorities of the government have shifted so significantly that they're not going to do maybe what we want. And so for me, part of working on this is maybe getting us to a place of some shared definition and understanding, and I don't think it could possibly be comprehensive enough to meet every single national law standard. So in terms of your comment about the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, yes, technically nobody has to comply with that right now in the United States. Not complying with that is a terrible idea.
Okay, the sheriff is in town. That would be me. I have no guns, though. It's 4:54, so this has gone almost 10 minutes over. And what I want to do, because I don't want to stifle conversation, is I would like to encourage you to bring up these points if they pertain to diamonds in the next discussion, if they pertain to other things in the relevant sessions tomorrow. And I would also like to encourage all of you, and Brad, I saw your hand, and I really hate doing this, but I've got somebody who's got a sword over mine. Please provide your valuable feedback here. And obviously, if you go to the site, the link is live. But you can also, write letters and make phone calls. And I may be bringing the wrath of God down on me, but so be it. But at any rate, I am terribly sorry, but we do need to draw close to this because we are now going to go into the discussion of diamonds at a crossroad, which I know will be another frothy exchange. And we thank you all for all your comments and keep them coming. And, one of the things is it's a living document. That has been the pledge from moment one. So, I think...